Good afternoon. I'm Casey Loffman, Editor-in-Chief of Food Engineering Magazine. Welcome to today's webinar, 5 Steps to FSMA-Compliant Pest Management. This event, brought to you by Food Engineering, is sponsored by Orkin. Today's presenter is Shel Hartzer, Technical Services Manager for Orkin. She is a board-certified entomologist and provides technical support and guidance across all Orkin brands in the areas of operations, marketing, and training. Don't forget to submit your questions, and later in the program, Shel will address as many as possible. Today's event is being recorded and archived on foodengineeringmag.com. And now I'm excited to turn it over to our presenter, Shel Hartzer.
All right, thank you, and thank you folks for being on today, talking about FSMA, talking about how that relates specifically to pest management, talking all about prevention, because really when we talk about integrated pest management, when we talk about FSMA requirements, the federal and the audit requirements, it really all goes to prevention. And of course, as Casey mentioned, keep those questions coming in and we will get to as many of those as we can. So let's start out with some of the basics, and most of you are probably pretty familiar with FSMA by now. FSMA is the Food Safety Modernization Act, and this was pretty sweeping when this went into effect, as well continues to go into effect over the last few years, because prior to this, the last federal governance that we had over the food industry was the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. So this was some pretty sweeping changes when you considered what it was and what it is now today. But this really goes to IPM. FSMA really follows most of those IPM principles of preventing issues, of trying to integrate all of the tools that we have to prevent problems and then to solve problems, and to really try and look at those underlying problems, not just covering them up with something, really trying to fix the underlying issues that may be there that are causing those pest issues, and not just covering them up. So this is a great thing to read through if you've got some extra time, but it is a pretty big document, and part of it is HARP-C, and this stands for Hazard Analysis and Risk-Based Preventative Control, and this was a really big change because we went from reaction and fixing a problem when it popped up to really trying to prevent these issues and look at those preventative controls. And again, this follows those IPM principles. We want to identify the problem. We want to monitor what's going on. And then we want to fix the issue with those tools. So HARP-C, the basis of this, one of the first steps, of course, is identifying the hazard. And there could be a lot of hazards. We're going to focus specifically, again, on the pest management aspect of it. There's a lot of other aspects to FSMA and HARP-C. Even when we get into your just general audit standards, a lot of requirements that go with that. We're just going to focus on pest control here. So obviously our hazards for pest management are going to be our insects, our rodents, maybe birds. In some cases, maybe this is lizards, depending on where you are. Frogs. I've had issues with frogs in some accounts. So identifying that hazard. And then again, those risk-based preventative controls. Okay? And that, again, looking at your risks and looking at how you can prevent some of these hazards from happening. Monitors are a really integral part of this. They can show us what's going on. They can show us what we have in a specific facility. Are populations increasing? Are populations decreasing? Are treatments, are corrective actions, are they working? And that goes to, again, corrective actions, which is the next point on that. What are we doing about this? Once we've identified the hazard, once we've tried to put those preventative controls in place, if something happens, what are our corrections to that? Verification, we'll talk a lot here about documentation in a bit, because documentation is important. If we don't write it down, it didn't happen. and to constantly analyze our program, to constantly keep it up to date, make sure that it's meeting the requirements that we need it to from a pest management standpoint. Change is not a bad thing. We want to change and adapt as conditions change and adapt. So as I said, we want to identify our hazards first. There are a number of hazards. Again, from this aspect, we are just focusing on pest control. We're talking about the pests themselves. There could always be some contamination from pesticides. Pesticides are used in food processing. We try and minimize that. We try and localize it, make it as little as possible. But that's always a hazard that could occur. If you think that pest management is strictly a unintentional thing, I did have one account where we had a disgruntled employee that was letting mice loose on the roof. So this could be intentional. He was going to the pet store, buying mice, and releasing them on the roof. We couldn't figure out how these mice were getting to the roof. It was an intentional hazard in that case. So a lot of things to think about. And so from your perspective, we're gonna do a fun little poll question here. See what you think. We've got people from all over here. We've got Puerto Rico. Hello, Puerto Rico. I saw some other islands on there. North Carolina. We've got California. Tons of folks from all over the country. And this is always a question I like to ask to see what's going on in your area. Every area is different. Every facility is different. You could have two food processing facilities that both manufacture cereal across the street from each other, and they're going to have two separate problems. And it's always interesting to see that happen as well, that you have two facilities that manufacture similar products that are in similar areas and yet still have different issues. So, and it'll be interesting too to see what you folks think on that. But keep those answers coming. I think we're getting a few here. Interesting. We've got some flies that are heading up the poll right now, but we'll give you another second or two to do that. Again, I know it may be a little early for some of you, a little late for the rest of you. I'm based here in Atlanta, so I've had my lunch. I'm ready for my afternoon snack and my nap probably, but all right. So let's see here. Got a lot of responses clicking in. And again, flies have kind of topped the list. That's interesting to me. Again, this goes to what your facility is, where it is. I can tell you that in the United States, we've had a very wet year, so we are definitely seeing more fly issues across the United States this year than we've seen in previous years. So for those of you who clicked in other, would love to see what your other problems are. So if you want to type that into the chat box, that'd be interesting for all of us to see. So keep this in mind as we go through this. You folks with cockroach issues, with fly issues, with rodents are your biggest issue. Not to say that you don't have other issues, but if those are your biggest ones, kind of focus on those first and keep that as your highest priority. So we have to establish those preventative controls. Again, how do we prevent those flies from being here? And integrated pest management for the food industry has been well established. The food industry was one of the first to really adopt an IPM strategy, so integrating all of those pest management methods. And again, trying to prevent issues from happening in the first place. All of those things are going to be important. So let's talk about some of them here. We've got a list of 5 things. You could probably expand this list to about 20, but we narrowed it down to the top 5. And inspection, I really like that we use this picture first, because when most people think about inspection, they think about inside, but that outside inspection is just as important, because many of our pest issues are going to start on the outside. They start there, and then they enter our structures. They enter our building. So your inspection should cover the outside of your building, of your facility, as well as the inside. So looking for any of these conducive conditions, these conditions that may mean pests are already there or that pests could inhabit those places because we've given them what they need. Looking for those entry points that allow them to get in. And when you think about an inspection, think about who's doing these inspections. If you educate all of the employees in your facility on what to look for, on some basic things of, something as simple as closing the doors and not leaving them propped open, you have everybody in your facility then doing pest management, which is a good thing. But when you do actual formal inspections, think about who's doing that. Is it the same person every single time? Is it the same time of day every single time? Definitely involve as many people and as many departments as you can. If you have a maintenance department, make sure that every so often they're walking around doing inspections. They're going to have a different take on things than, say, somebody from the QA department. Get management involved. Make them work. Get them out there looking at things and looking for these spaces. Also, look at the landscaping on the outside. I mean, we've pointed out a lot of things here, closing those doors, checking your dock plates and your dock seals. The roof is one that a lot of people miss when they do their inspections. Nobody thinks to go up on the roof, but many of our HVAC systems, our air handling systems are up on the roof. There's a lot of vents that are up on the roof that could allow pest entry. So, again, the outside can be just as important. Looking at the landscaping, making sure your trees, your shrubs are kind of trimmed back from the building. And pay special attention to those dumpster areas. Dumpsters are often a little closer to the buildings than we'd like them to be, which allows pests very easy access. So if we can keep those dumpster areas clean, if we can inspect around them more regularly so we know when they need to be serviced, when they need to be emptied, when they need to be cleaned, that's going to help prevent those pest problems. So of course the inside then is the next step. Once you inspect the outside, you look for those openings, you look for those doors that aren't sealing. All of our pests, just like everything out there, needs food, water, and shelter. And your facility has food, water, and shelter. So you're making the food. The shelter is the building, and water is always present in some form that these insects especially can take advantage of. In fact, house mice do not need a daily water source. If you have rats as your issue, they need to actually drink water every day, but mice can get all the water that they need from the food that they're eating. So water is a resource that they're pretty good at finding. So we want to look for, as we inspect, any spills, any areas that have a buildup of food residue that shouldn't be there. We're looking for those sanitation issues. When we say those cluttered areas, most warehouses that I've ever been in, I call it their graveyard. There's this little graveyard area of a warehouse where old equipment, old boxes, even old product has kind of been shoved into a corner, into a graveyard area. And those areas don't get looked at quite often, and they're overgrown with equipment and boxes and old stuff, so they don't get inspected very often, which means the pests will take advantage of that. Inspection is pretty simple when you think about it. Just look everywhere all the time. But that's what makes inspection so difficult. You can't possibly look everywhere at every single moment of the day. You have a job to do. Everybody out there has a job to do. So this is why it's important to involve other people, whether that's the maintenance department, the QA department, all the employees that are out on the field, the warehouse manager, the production area managers. Everybody can keep their eyes open for some simple things that they're looking for. So your inspection should really cover as much as possible. We all realize that looking at everything all the time is impossible, but as much as you can, and put that on a schedule. Make sure that your inspection happens on a regular schedule. That's probably not every day, but maybe it's certain areas once a week and certain areas that get looked at least once a month. Have that schedule. And again, that documentation that we'll talk about later, this is important to record that. And of course, your inspection should come up with some of these facility maintenance issues. When you have those holes in the bottom of the door seal, when you have those roof leaks and those vents that are not sealed up, your inspection should point you to these areas. And a good rule of thumb, if you think of it that way, is that a full-grown rat needs something about the size of your thumb to get in. So any openings that are about the size of your thumb, maybe a little bit bigger, a full-grown rat can squeeze into that. A house mouse can squeeze into something about the size of your pinky finger. Okay? And insects, if you can stand inside a doorway and you can see daylight around that doorway, insects can obviously get in. So from a maintenance perspective, we want to prevent those pests from entering. Some of these things are going to be very expensive, let's be honest. Some of the fixes that you may need for some older buildings especially are going to be very pricey. So even if you can do temporary fixes, again, your inspection should point you to those areas when those temporary fixes may have started failing so you can fix them again. But it's not just outside. When we talk about exclusion, when we talk about keeping the pests out, when you have pest issues inside, sometimes you can do exclusion on the inside and isolate certain areas. I was in a facility that we were having a problem with small flies. Most of you, again, on that poll, we brought up the flies on that. And it was an older facility, and every time they washed the floors, they had this one fairly big area that the water would accumulate. It just wouldn't drain. The floors kind of had shifted over the years, and so standing water would build up. And the flies were taking advantage of the dirty water, the particles in the water to continuously breed. So what they did is they actually put up a temporary wall. They put up plastic sheeting that went from the ceiling down to the floor, and they sealed off that area. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it was enough to keep most of those flies away from the rest of their processing areas. So when we think about these prevention methods of preventing pests from getting in, sometimes it's preventing pests from moving around the facility. If we can keep them contained, that's a good thing too. So even think on a temporary standpoint. If we can't do a permanent fix to some of these problems, can we do a temporary fix? One of the things I will always recommend as well is take pictures. This goes to that inspection portion. Take pictures for your facility maintenance crews. This is going to be important to show them exactly what you're talking about when you say this door seal is not sealing all the way down to the ground, or this dock door is crooked and is leaving a big gap. So take pictures. The other nice thing about pictures is again, when we get to that documentation portion that we're going to talk about, the pictures are your document that this was the problem, and you can take a picture afterwards that says, we corrected the problem. So when you think back to those HARP C things that we were talking about, documentation was part of that, but your corrective actions were part of that as well. So think about keeping those pests out, or think about keeping those pests contained when we talk about this prevention from a physical standpoint. And again, your inspection should point out some sanitation issues or some potential sanitation issues. This is a picture of the inside, but if you remember back to the first slide I put up on inspection, don't forget about the outside. Our pest problems, many of them start on the outside. If you're having an issue with large flies, with rodents especially, that starts on the outside of a facility and they get in through those gaps. So how can we minimize what they have? All living things need food, water, and shelter. Unfortunately, your facility produces food or holds food. That's the point. So we can't clean up all the food. It's impossible. Then we wouldn't be producing anything. We wouldn't be storing anything. But how can we minimize their access to it? So as I said, I'm on East Coast time here in Atlanta. It's getting to be about snack time, and if somebody brings in 24 warm chocolate chip cookies, that's great. You know, I get tons of cookies. I'm satisfied. I curl up in a ball in the corner and fall asleep and take a nap. But now, what happens if somebody only brings in one cookie, puts it 3 rooms over behind 2 locked doors? Now, I have to work a whole lot harder to get a whole lot less food. So when we think about sanitation, think about it from the aspect of how do we make it harder for our pests to get to the food that we're producing, that we're storing. Put it behind a locked door, put it in something else. Think of it from that aspect. Minimize the amount that's out, that's available, that's easy for them. Because if they have to work harder, they're spending a lot more energy just trying to get food than they are reproducing or, chewing holes through wires or anything else like that. So look at minimizing the amount and the access to food that these pests have. You should have a sanitation schedule. Again, let's go back to that documentation piece that's part of HARP-C. You should have daily activities. You should have weekly activities, monthly. And for some of these facilities, sanitation of everything, again, is extremely difficult. You may have stuff that you can only get to when you do plant shutdowns, and maybe that's only once or twice a year. But you should have that checklist, and you should make sure that it's being used. And again, don't forget about that outside sanitation. A lot of times when we see sanitation issues, they're around dumpsters, they're around employee break areas. Employees can bring in pests. The break room, the outside areas often don't get cleaned as well as a processing room floor or a warehouse. So pest problems can start there and spread throughout the rest of the facility. So just like inspection, where it's easy, you just have to look at everything all the time, sanitation is easy. You just have to clean up everything all the time. But it is impossible to do that. So try and think of all of these things together, trying to keep those pests out, trying to keep those pests contained, and trying to keep the food as unavailable as possible. Make sure trash bins get emptied. Make sure the dumpster gets emptied on a regular basis. All of these things are going to help to minimize the problem. When we talk about prevention, we're not always talking preventing the issue, because let's be honest, most of you folks who have done this, you know that you're going to have pest problems. It's a fact of what we're producing. It's a fact of that we're doing food processing, food storage. We're going to have pest issues. But how do we prevent them from being huge issues? How do we prevent them from spreading? So we can think about prevention in a slightly different way as well. Not just a standpoint of preventing all the issues, but preventing them from being big issues, preventing them from increasing when that happens. So monitoring is part of this. Monitoring is your extra set of eyes. We talk about inspection and all the people that you should have involved in that, and the fact that really all of your employees can keep an eye out for things. Monitors are just another set of eyes in your facility. Back to HARP-C, monitoring for effectiveness and verification were two of the bullet points for HARP-C. So what monitoring does is allow you to identify your pests. So maybe, again, you have fly issues, but what type of flies? Are they large flies that are maybe coming from the outside? Are they smaller flies that are potentially coming from an inside drain? So it allows us to identify what our pests are. It also allows us to track numbers, and not just how many flies are there right now, today, but what's the change over time? Are those fly problems increasing? Are the numbers decreasing? These monitoring devices can point to sanitation issues and exclusion issues. If you have an insect light trap that all of a sudden has a lot more flies in it than it did the previous week and the week before, well, look at the closest door. Is somebody leaving the door propped open? Or is the dumpster that's right outside that door overflowing because nobody picked it up last week? This can point us to these areas that need to be addressed from a sanitation issue or from an exclusion standpoint. So this can focus our inspections. Again, we can't look everywhere all the time. So if a monitoring device is telling us something is going on here, something's going wrong, we can focus our inspections on just those areas, and while not ignore all the other areas, spend less time in them because we know that there aren't as many issues. HARP-C is also about verification, so our monitoring devices can help us validate. They can help us validate a treatment. Say that there was just a fogging that was done in a warehouse for those stored product pests. We should expect to see those stored product pests in the monitors, those numbers go down. But it's not just treatment, it validates all of your corrective actions. If we have small fly issues and a light trap was pointing to that, and we cleaned all the drains that are in that area, we should hope that that small fly problem is reduced. If not, did we miss a drain? Is there some other water source, some other food source that we missed? So that validation is important when it comes to the monitoring devices too. So this ongoing monitoring is a big help when it comes to prevention. And we have a number of different devices that we can use. We have pheromone traps, especially for those stored product pests. If you have Indian meal moth or flower beetles, this is a great way to track those types of pests. Your insect light traps, all of you folks who said that flies are your major problem, this is a great way to figure out where those flies are, what the populations are. These should be close to outside openings like dock doors and personnel doors, but not too close. You're kind of looking for that Goldilocks spot, close but not too close, far enough away but not too far away. And this can also tell you what your outside insects are doing, because let's be honest, the doors have to open and close every so often. So what's coming in and what are those outside insects that are coming in? Again, can we do something on the outside that might minimize that outside pressure, which will then in turn minimize how many can get into the building? Something as simple as a glue board. We have a number of pests that are going to be crawling in, whether that's through that broken door seal or whether that's delivered in on a box of raw ingredients. So glue boards can be very valuable to tell us what's going on. But it's not just check the traps, write a number down. I bet most of you have an outside person doing your pest management. So hopefully they're not just coming in, checking that light trap, writing down that there's 10 flies and moving on. You have to look at the data and what that trend is telling you. If we go back to those flies, are the flies increasing? Are the flies decreasing? Are you seeing a shift in where they are? And this is a question that you should be asking your pest management professional. What is this data telling you? What are you seeing here? So that you, in turn, can then do some extra sanitation in those areas, inspect those areas more. So it's not just a number. Again, we talked about auditing and those corrective actions. Your pests are going to tell you what's going on. So these monitors are going to be that number to say, yes, the treatment that we just did, it works, because look, those numbers dropped down. So that validates your corrective action. And your monitoring program shouldn't be static. If you've set up a monitoring program and 5 years later all of your devices are still all in the same place, you may want to reevaluate that because conditions change. Your facility has probably changed. So whether you're looking at rodent traps, bait stations on the outside, insect light traps, look at your program at least once a year and evaluate, is it still doing what you need it to? Are those devices still placed correctly and in areas that they're giving you the right information? And the very last point on this slide is an important one, this pest sighting log. I mentioned that you have all these folks in your facility, all of these eyes that are out there. Your monitoring devices are an extra set of eyes, but use the eyes that you have. All those folks that are working on the processing floor or in the warehouse, in the QA lab, anywhere, tell them what to look for and have a means that they can report that. Whether this is a physical piece of paper that you have them write down what they found, where they found it, or whether it's a person that they tell. It has to be some way that they can report this, though. In most of the situations that I've been in that problems have gotten very, very bad, I've talked to the employees that are out there, and they all knew that the problem was there. They all knew that this had been going on for weeks or months, and now the problem was huge. But they never thought to tell anyone. Nobody ever told them, if you see something, tell this person. If you see something, write it down in this log. And this pest sighting log is really important for your pest management professional. If you have, again, that outside person who's coming in to do these traps, these treatments, this pest sighting log is really important because, again, it points them in the right spots to focus their attention. It points them to the correct areas that they need to focus on more. So a pest sighting log can be as simple as just a date, location, and what they think they found. Whether it's, I saw a rodent run through aisle 5 of the warehouse, or I think I saw a bug under processing line 2. Just a little bit of detail. The more detail you can provide, the better, but it can be pretty simple as long as it's something to point a person into that right direction of where they can look for those sanitation issues, where they can look to prevent this from getting worse. And really, the faster we can find an issue, the faster we can find it when it's still small, the easier it is to deal with. We have more tools when those problems are small. So this brings us to documentation. There is, unfortunately, a lot of documentation that you folks need. And for anyone working in this industry, you know that you go through multiple audits probably every year, whether those are internal audits or external audits. You need a lot of paperwork. But from a pest control standpoint, what we're looking for is that written IPM plan. And this is part of FSMA. You must have a written integrated pest management plan. And again, this isn't one person's responsibility. Get everybody involved in this. Get management and QA and QC and maintenance and all the departments that you have. Get them involved in this so that they will help with this plan. Again, if you have an outside company doing your pest management, there should be an annual facility assessment. And this is great because this can incorporate all of your corrective actions. That annual facility assessment looks back at the last year and says, these were the biggest problems, this is what we did about it, this is what we need to do going forward. So you have that written assessment to help you plan. Maybe that's moving monitoring devices around. Maybe that's changing the time schedule of how often your dumpster gets changed out. Could be anything. So this is going to point you in the right direction and give you a plan of working forward. Again, that pest sighting log is a great tool. I don't know how many employees that are out there in each of these individual facilities, but why not use them? Something as simple as a 5 or 10 minute training of these are our most prevalent pests that we see here. Look for door seals, look for openings, and that's it. As simple as that, and use their eyes. Let them report this to you, and they will be doing inspections then. It's a great tool to have, and again, as long as it's used to the point of letting these problems getting out of hand. Something as simple as one person saying they saw a rat in the warehouse can really avert a lot of problems. So think of, again, the prevention aspect of this program. I'll harp on monitoring devices just a little bit more here because they are really important. You need to have these monitoring devices out to help you. And again, it gives you that idea of what those populations are doing. That pest sighting log that your employees can report on gives you a snapshot. It says, I thought I saw something this one time. But your monitoring devices are out there 24/7, so you can look back and see what happened last week, last month, even last year. And that helps you prep for this year and prevent some of those issues. If you know that in June last year you saw a big increase in mice, we can prep for that this year and make sure that in May we put out more devices, more traps to control that population on the outside so fewer of them get in. So looking at that trend report. Again, for most of you, your pest management company is probably putting these things together for you, but you need to understand them, and you need to question your pest management professional. Ask them what it means. Ask them what you should be doing. Ask them what else that the combination of what you're doing and they're doing could be done better. You need to have your safety data sheets and your labels. Now, most audits and the government now do accept these as electronic files, so as long as you have them online or accessible electronically, you're fine. So we don't have to print off entire notebooks full of paper anymore, which is rather nice. And most of you folks will have an approved pesticide list. These are the things that you can use at your site. Just like your annual facility assessment and your written IPM plan, this should be reviewed at least one time per year and signed off on. Pesticides change. Maybe there's something new out that would be really beneficial. Maybe there's something old that is no longer available. So at least one time per year, make sure you check that approved pesticide list. Training is important. Your pest management professional should obviously be very well trained and have all of that training on file. But think about training your employees as well. Think about quick 5-10 minute trainings, a most wanted list of pests that could be found in your facility. This is something easy to do. Hang up a poster, put out comment cards that say, put your comment card in here when you find something. From your aspect of training at your facility, these can be done by your pest management professional. There's online trainings that you can take. But again, the more information that you and all of your employees have, the better job that you can do to preventing these problems, catching them when they're small, preventing them from getting worse. Because it really is a partnership. Again, assuming that most of you have an outside company who's doing the majority of your pest control work, that communication is really important. I would almost put this as step 6 or step 5B on our list here, is that communication aspect. Your pest management professionals should be talking to you about the data that they're collecting, about the inspections that they're doing, about the things that they see that you should be taking care of, whether that's a sanitation issue or an exclusion issue. You should be questioning your pest management professional about the trend reports, about their last annual facility assessment, about all of these things that they're reporting to you. You should be questioning them about the pest sighting log, making sure that they look for that. It should be something that they automatically do, but check that every once in a while. Are they signing off on it? Are those corrective actions there? And work on those corrective actions together. Again, this partnership works really well when you can say, here's the problem, here's the potential corrective actions, and then afterwards that validation, that verification that whatever you did worked. And if it didn't work, okay, what else can we do now? So that communication, that partnership between you and your pest management professional is important to keep those issues in check. And again, staff training can be provided in a number of different ways. We have mentioned audits a couple times here. Documentation is linked to your audits, whether that's an internal audit, an external audit. I'd like to say that less than half of your audit is going to be paperwork, but for most of you who have been through an audit, you know that the majority of your audit is probably going to be all about that documentation. So the more you document, the better you document, usually the better your audit will go. We do have audit prep tips, specifically for the major audit systems, BRC, SQF, and a few other ones there. And there's also some food safety tips as well. So you can follow Orkin on LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect to me. And we've got Orkin Commercial as well. Lots of really great materials. I know, again, a number of you mentioned the flies and the rodents. We've got great material on that you could use for staff training. So I'll leave you with that one last thought of this is about prevention. And for those of you who have been in this industry for a while, you've probably seen some changes over the decades, the years that have gone by of just
maybe spraying something to kill a pest to, wait, why did this pest get in? Why is it here? What is it feeding on? And how can we solve this problem so it doesn't happen again? Have that partnership, have that good relationship and that good communication with your pest management professional. And we do also have, under the handouts tab, we have additional resources there. So check out that little handouts tab on your screen. And again, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn, but my email is also up here. Going forward, we'll try and answer a whole bunch of questions right now, but going forward, if you have additional questions, love to talk to you about what you have going on and how we might be able to solve that problem or at least minimize it, prevent it from getting worse. So with that, I think I will hand it back to Casey.